Welcome back to Lost in Games Unscripted, the series where I promise I don't just talk about The Walking Dead seasons. Though today we will be talking about Season 4 of The Walking Dead. Kind of, sort of, because I've got some thoughts about more than just Season 4. We'll get into it in a second. But first, I do want to talk about something real briefly, just because the past couple of weeks have been kind of rough for me. I've been through quite a bit. And I wanted to share with you guys just briefly a little bit about that because it could directly impact the channel at some point. So I actually had a biopsy done a couple of weeks ago on my thyroid. And I have to have another one done because they messed up the first one and didn't get enough cells. Amazing. Not looking forward to that, but also not looking forward to the potential diagnosis that comes following that. Right now, the doctor said there's a pretty decent chance that it's going to wind up being something, and I might have to get some surgery at some point. If and when that time comes, I will let everybody know, just so you know what to expect. I don't want to go without uploading or without sharing what might be going on as we move forward through things, just in case. Because if I go a couple of weeks and you guys don't see or hear from me, I want you to know what's going on, all right? Just because it's fair. If you're going to give me your time, you're going to watch the videos and like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I think it's only right that I share what's going on behind the scenes with you guys. So that being said, I want to get in and talk about The Walking Dead Season 4 today because it's something that's been on my mind since I finished Season 4. So Season 4 was probably my second favorite season of The Walking Dead game, okay? And that's only because Season 2 and Season 3 were so very lackluster. Season 3 would have been my favorite if it hadn't been for the shoehorn in of Clementine. If it had been its own thing and Clementine had her own story for Season 3, that would have been fine. I just didn't like the fact that they kind of pushed her in where she wasn't necessarily needed. Season 2, we've been there. We know about the problems of Season 2. Season 4, though, has its own share of problems. And the biggest one to me is actually AJ. I'm not a fan of AJ. I don't like AJ as a character. I don't like AJ as a part of the story. And maybe I'm alone on that. Maybe everybody else out there, you're all saying, what do you mean? AJ was the greatest part of the entire series. But just hear me out for a second, because I feel like AJ was kind of pushed in there in Season 2 as a... I don't want to say MacGuffin because that's not the right term, but he was just kind of an added little thing in Season 2. You know, kind of thrown in at the last minute, where just so happened that Rebecca was pregnant and was going to have the baby, and the baby was born, and now we have to take care of the baby. It was just kind of this extra thing, right? And I don't think they were thinking long term necessarily when they added him in. You could have had an AJ storyline or a Clementine storyline sans AJ. And Season 2 and 3 would have been just as basically the same way, right? Even in Season 3, yeah, she kind of wants to come back because, you know, David knows about AJ and all that kind of stuff, but you could have put something else in there. Season 4 should have been all about wrapping up Clementine's story. And you didn't need AJ to do that. Clementine could have been at the train station by herself. She didn't have to be teaching AJ about the world and how to do all these different things and how to be quiet, and like none of that was necessary. And I think it would have been even cooler, especially given the Jane storyline with Season 2, to have AJ and see her as a solo survivor after everything that happened in Season 2. And depending on how you went with Kenny or Jane or by yourself, like, I think it would have been really interesting to see that evolution of Clementine just becoming this solo survivor, but with the opportunity to actually join a community, and maybe even seeing the possibility of what a community could be based off of Season 3. You know, there's a million different ways you could have gone with it. Even if you keep Season 2 and 3 the way that they were, just take out AJ. Because at that point, you wind up with Clementine, basically nothing really has to change, except for the very last bit. And so if I'm writing Season 4, I'm taking AJ completely out of it. We don't need him. You can still wind up at the school, and you can still wind up making friends with the other kids, and you can still wind up with Lily coming in, and you can have all of that stuff. And as a matter of fact, I would probably get rid of Lily. Because that's the other part of season 4. I wasn't a fan of bringing Lily back and trying to make her this like evil bad guy, but also wanting to give her kind of a redemption in a way. Like, if you don't kill Lily, you can see as she's floating away on the raft that like she's devastated, and it's almost one of those deals where like when Clementine says, "Well, I feel sorry for you," type of thing, where Lily has just been wrecked and she's had this horrible, terrible time in the apocalypse, and it's almost like the developers wanted you to kind of feel bad for Lily, to not be sure about what to do with her, or to absolutely just hate her and just have AJ kill her off. And that's the other thing, is with AJ, you have to, if you pick the option to have AJ shoot Lily, he just like empties the magazine into her. And it's supposed to be this thing where you're teaching AJ all along how to live and what, helping him with a moral code and that kind of thing. But it throws everything out the window. If there was a scene, if the scene with Lily changed based off of how you had taught AJ, if instead of shooting her a million times, he just fired one shot into her, or even better, I wish you get to the end of the season, or you get to the end of episode 4 or 3. It was episode 3. And instead of having AJ shoot her, if Clementine says, "AJ, shoot her," maybe you've decided at that point, like, you just need to shoot Lily. What if AJ stopped and said, "No, you told me not to shoot unarmed. She's unarmed. She's not a threat anymore. Remember what happened back in the beginning with Marlon? Like, you told me not to shoot unarmed people who had surrendered. I'm not going to do that." And then you could even then have the situation where James gets stabbed and play it off. I think that gets a little more confusing for AJ, which is probably why they didn't do it, because they wouldn't have had a real good way to get out of that. But it also, at the same time, would give you a way to explain to AJ that, look, there's some nuance to situations. Marlon really was surrendering. He was actually giving up. He was really remorseful. Lily is vindictive and can't be trusted. Therefore, we had to take her out. That was the right move. And now you see what happened. She killed James. I think if you're going to have AJ in there, you have to have some kind of difference in the way that he turns out. There's some stuff that changes, as far as I know, if you tell him that he doesn't have the choice to do things, like he won't shoot, what's her face on the bridge? my mind is blanking. But ultimately, it's not really that big of a difference. And if you take AJ out completely, if you don't have AJ in there, maybe instead you could have a situation with 10 that turns out differently. You could have, where Clementine and 10 kind of get close together after 10 has lost his sisters, and then we find out that his one sister is still alive. And, you could have these different aspects in there that would make a lot more sense. Just get rid of AJ. Because Clementine, at the end of season 2, is, I want to say, 11 years old. Maybe 12 at the very oldest. And at that age, you're telling me that she is taking this newborn baby, either by herself, with Jane, or with Kenny, and then she's responsible for it, and all these adults are just like, yeah, this is fine. This newborn baby that, by the way, she has only been around if you make it to Wellington. Let's go full in. You make it to Wellington. This baby's like 11 days old. And the only reason that that they care for him at all is just because he's a baby. Not because there's any real connection there, not because they had a real close relationship with Rebecca or any of that kind of stuff. It's just because he's a baby. At that point, the right thing to do, if you get to Wellington, is say, can somebody else take care of this baby, some adult that knows what they're doing, so that Clementine can, even if she's not going to be a kid where she's playing with toys and shit, she can go learn to be a kid in the zombie apocalypse without having to worry about raising this child that's not hers or related to her in any way, shape, or form. It would have been different if, let's say, Kenny and Sarita had gotten pregnant. Let's say the baby was Sarita's. Now that could have been an interesting situation where you wind up with, Sarita, and she gets bit, but maybe she goes into labor and has the baby before she turns, or something crazy happens like that, or she goes into labor and dies the same way that Rebecca did instead of getting bit. That would have given a reason to have a baby that would have been somebody they cared about. Kenny would have cared about the baby because it's his baby. He doesn't want to lose another child. That would have given him a reason to get really upset with Jane. I mean, just imagine that scenario where Jane decides to do what she did with AJ, but except with Kenny's baby. And that would give all the reason in the world that Kenny would lose his shit, because that's his second child that he's now lost, he thinks. Like, all of this is solved if you just get rid of Rebecca and AJ. And I know it comes across as like, oh my God, you're just complaining about AJ. But that's the case. I just don't like him as a character. And as a kid, just the stuff he says, the way he acts, he's just so pompous. He's so, there's times where he can be a sweet little kid, but he's also growing up in the apocalypse. And so he's going to be different. He's going to think things differently. But he's also like just so rude and crude. And yeah, that's partially because he hasn't been around a lot of people. But like, come on. Give me something other than she gets separated from this baby that she doesn't really have a connection with. And yeah, if you stay at Wellington, it makes a little bit more sense. Even if you go a little bit longer outside of that, if you go with Jane or if you go with Kenny and you're with him for a little bit longer, you get kind of attached to him. But like, we don't see any of that. We aren't there for that year at Wellington. We aren't there for that time leading up to Kenny and the car crash ending that we just don't talk about. We aren't there for the time between getting to House Hardware and Jane ending her life. Like, we aren't there for that stuff. We don't have that connection with AJ. And even in season 3, while Clementine is clearly hung up on the fact that AJ was taken away from her and she thinks that AJ is dead, we didn't have any of that time with AJ leading up to David taking him. We don't have that, she goes and gets AJ from the ranch, and we don't have that time with AJ until the beginning of season 4, and then we have to get to know this little 5-year-old or 5-year-old kid, 4 or 5, something like that. We have to get to know this kid as he's older, and why should we care? From the very start of season 4, because I had not really played it. I hadn't played it at all prior to when I played it for the playthrough on the channel here. And from the very start of it, I was like, who is this kid? Why should I care about him? I knew it was AJ, but I'm like, why? Why is he here? I just don't give two shits about what happens to him. If he gets bit and dies, like, Clementine would care because she's been with him for all those years. I have no idea. I haven't been around him. I haven't formed that bond, that relationship. If it had been Kenny and Sarita's kid, at least there's that connection, right? At least you had spent all of season 1 with Kenny and with Duck, right? And so you would have that feeling of like, this is Kenny's second chance. And even if Kenny doesn't make it, it could be a promise from Kenny, the AJ or the Clementine makes Kenny, hey, I'll raise Duck version 2.0. I don't know what they would call him, all right? But that could be a promise that they would make, or that she would make to, and then it would feel more, you would feel more of an attachment as a player to this child that was Kenny's kid. Like, there was all the, as opposed to just being some random kid. And I don't know what their reasoning was. I don't know if they just didn't think it through. I know there was a lot of problems with the writing. I know there's a lot of problems with the studio at the time, because season 4, like, the studio basically shut down halfway through season 4, and they just kind of rushed to finish the season. But even going into season 3, they were struggling. They were having some problems. And I don't know whose idea it was to just say, hey, we're going to have, here's this random character from season 2 that, by the way, is kind of a bitch to you at the beginning. She doesn't really get much of a redemption arc. She is kind of nice to Clementine a little bit later, but like, I wouldn't say she gets a redemption arc or that she becomes like besties with Clementine. and she's having a baby, and then she's going to die in childbirth. Her husband died being beaten up by Carver, and by the way, you're now stuck with this child. Like, why? This is not necessary. This was absolutely stupid writing. And it just piles on to some of the other stuff. I'll probably make a video just overall talking about Telltale's writing at some point, just because there were some really horrible decisions made by the writing team. And as an author, it bothers me when I see this stuff and I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. Why did you do this? What was the point? You know, there's good writing in games and there's bad writing in games, and Telltale falls on the bad stuff most of the time. That being said, I'm probably going to talk in the next unscripted video about The Wolf Among Us, because that game blew me out of the water. When I played Wolf Among Us, I was sitting there and I was like, the same studio that made Walking Dead seasons 2, 3, and 4 made this? This was Wolf Among Us was even better than The Walking Dead season 1, in my opinion. The story, the characters, it was amazing. And Walking Dead season 1, don't get me wrong, it's high up there. I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the story. It had its flaws, but like it had some really cool stuff in it. But The Wolf Among Us blew it out of the water. And I see that game and I'm like, how the hell did Telltale go out of business? And I know a lot of it had to do with the staffing, and they kind of took on too much. Whole nother topic. But I'm like, there is so much potential here. And so much potential for seasons 2, 3, and 4 of The Walking Dead. You know, like, how does the same studio that made that make these seasons and throw in a character like AJ in season 4 of The Walking Dead? It just blows my mind. But I want to know what you guys think out there, because honestly, I feel like I'm probably in the minority. I feel like a lot of people liked AJ. I don't know. Honestly, I want to hear what you guys think and what you guys thought of AJ. Am I way off? Is there something I missed about his character that like I should have enjoyed? Or is it just, or am I right? Am I right on the money and not enough people are talking about this? Let me know down in the comments below. I have a Patreon and channel memberships. I mention those quite often, every video as a matter of fact. But what I don't mention is the Discord server, which I actually just linked up to YouTube so that members, and I already had it for Patreon, but members get a special channel on Discord. But everybody can come to Discord and chat in the general chat. We have some pretty cool conversations sometimes. We talk about The Walking Dead every once in a while. Random stuff. There's some cool people over there. So go check out the Discord if that's, it's linked in the description below, just like everything else. But that's all I've got for this one, actually. Do you like my coffee mug? That's the other, well, tea mug. It's not really a coffee mug, I guess. I don't know. But that's all I got for this one. I do want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.